Excuse me. And I don't speak today as your pastor because I'm not your pastor. I'm just somebody who's been asked to speak today. But I do feel like that God wants to speak to us this morning. And so I'll just start off with asking this question. And you don't have to answer out loud. How many here like it when things change? I will tell you that I personally am not a big fan of change. I have found in many times it's not necessarily the change itself that we're afraid of. Instead, it's fear of what the change might bring that makes us dislike change. Since we can't see the future and we don't know what might be brought about by change, many times it's easier and it's more comfortable for us to just keep doing what we've been doing. And so fear of change, fear of the unknown, sometimes keeps us just in the same status quo. Most of us can pretty well, by this time in our lives, can pretty well tell where we're headed. We know that if, for the most part, if we keep doing what we're doing, then this is pretty much what's going to happen. And said a different way, if we continue to do what we're doing, we'll keep getting what we're getting. And I'm talking about our lives. Most of us are in a career and a job of some type, or we're in a place in our life that we pretty much know what lies ahead without any major disasters. Another reason that some people don't like change is that it makes them feel like they're less in control of this new change situation. And there are folks, I won't say that I'm in that group, but there are some folks that get uncomfortable when they feel they don't have control over things. I will tell you, for me, one of those things is that I like to be in control of is driving. In fact, I get so uncomfortable with that feeling of being out of control that I don't really like to ride in a car when somebody else is driving. If I'm going to be in the car, I want to drive. You say, well, that's kind of silly. No, here's the way I look at it. I want my hands on the steering wheel because I trust me, and I might not trust you. And so I feel like if my hands are on the steering wheel, then I'm more in control of the situation, and I can say pretty much what's going to happen. And if we're not careful, we will find that we do the same thing with God. We start to feel like our hands have to be on the steering wheel of our life and setting the direction of our life, or we just don't like it and we get really uncomfortable. And then when things start to change, we start to panic, forgetting all along that God is really the one who's in control. Sometimes we just have to take our hands off of the wheel. Now, I'm not going to sing Jesus Take the Wheel, so. But that's really what we need to do in our lives a lot of times. If you read the book of Exodus, you'll read that after hundreds of years in slavery in Egypt, the Israelites, led by Moses, took off out of Egypt and headed to a land called Canaan that God had promised them. This land was also referred to as the Promised Land because it's what God promised them. He promised that wherever they went in this land, wherever they set their foot, that land would be theirs. So they took off on this journey that should have taken them about 3 months to complete. They get to the border of Canaan, the Promised Land, and instead of just going across the border and taking what God had already promised to them, they decided instead to send in 10 spies to see what the land was like. There's that fear of the unknown. 8 of the 10 spies came back and said, there is no way for us to go do that. We can't go in there. The people are like giants. But 2 of the spies, and their names were given to us, their names were Joshua and Caleb, they came back having seen the exact same thing, and instead of saying, we can't do that, they said, yes, we can, let's go. And keep in mind, they all saw the same thing. They all saw the same people, they saw the same things in the land, and yet 8 of the 10 come back and say, we can't do it, it can't be done, let's just stay right where we are. But 2 came back and said, yes, we can, let's go. Keep in mind this too. As far as I can find, we have no record of who those 8 people were. Because as far as I know, they never accomplished anything for God. We don't know their names. We just know they were the 8 guys who said we can't do it. And sadly, the majority of the people of Israel, they sided with the 8. In fact, they got so riled up, they accused Moses of the very one who, following God, brought them out of Egypt and led them across the Red Sea and all of those things. They accused him of bringing them out here to kill them. Keep in mind, they were slaves in Egypt. Now they're free. Now God is providing for them daily with food. And they accused the very one who led them out of bringing them out here to kill them. They even complained about the food. The food that God miraculously provided for them every day. In response to this attitude, God said, okay, here's the deal. None of you who are alive today, not a single one of you, will ever set foot in that land except Joshua and Caleb. They're the 2 that went over there and said, yes, we can, and the rest of y'all, you're going to die. And the book of Exodus tells us that they wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years until that entire generation died off. All except for Joshua and Caleb and Moses. 40 years to make a 3-month trip. And now 40 years later, we find that a different generation is standing at the border of the Promised Land. And remember, all those who were here last time have died except for 3 people, and that's Joshua, Caleb, and Moses. And even though Moses was there, because he had sinned, God told him that he could see the Promised Land, but he would never set foot in it. So only 2 people were going to go into the Promised Land. So picture this. Here they are at the border, and Moses has brought everyone together to tell this new generation the story of their ancestors' journey into Egypt. Turn those monitors down, please. Everything from how they had escaped from slavery to their disobedience to God. Moses told this new generation how God had protected and provided for their ancestors, even when they were disobedient. Even in the wilderness, after they had sinned, and God was punishing them, and they were going to die in the wilderness, he still provided them with food and water and everything to take care of them. So why does Moses take time to tell them this story? He tells them these things in order to keep this generation from making the same mistakes that the previous generation had made. He let them know the conditions of the covenant that God had made with their ancestors. The covenant that he would give them whatever land they set foot on, that God would give it to them and it would be theirs. This is the land that I have promised to you. All you have to do is just go in and take it. So Moses reminded the people of the blessings, but he also reminded them of the certainty of judgment that God had made on their ancestors. And the certainty of judgment that was for them too, if they decided not to be obedient. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 30 and read our text today, verses 15 through 19. Moses has gotten up and he's told this story, and this is how he's ended it up. See, I set before you life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, but the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. But if your hearts turn away and you are not obedient, and if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. This day I call heaven and earth as a witness against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life, so that your children may live. And if I had to title this message today, I would title it Changes and Choices, Fear of the Unknown. Changes and choices, fear of the unknown. So at this point, the people had a choice, just as we do today. God did not force them to be obedient. He did not force them to follow him. They had choices to make. And for us today, as back then, God places choices before us, the choices that we make that determine the direction that we go. even though that God is in control, the decision to whether or not we follow his leading is still up to us. He does not force us to follow him. He does, however, promise to be with us if we do. Now, he will also let us know the consequences of our choices. But in the end, the choice is still ours. Deuteronomy 31, 1 through 8. Then Moses went out and spoke these words to all Israel. I am now 120 years old, and I am no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said, you shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua will also cross over ahead of you, as the Lord has said. And the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, who he destroyed along with their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them what I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua and said in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with this people into the land that the Lord swore to their forefathers to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Verses 2 and 3 of this chapter are powerful scriptures. This is where Moses is telling them that he won't be going with them. But he doesn't leave it at that. He doesn't just say, well, I'm not going, good luck, y'all are on your own. No, he says, I won't be going with you, but the Lord himself will cross over ahead of you. He goes on to tell them not to be afraid. Joshua, you remember Joshua? He was one of the two that went over and said, yeah, we can do this. Joshua will be your new leader, and God will be with you in battle, and he will destroy your enemies. Verse 6 says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Rather than respond to the challenge with fear, unbelief, or disobedience, they were to trust God and just simply obey his command. In verse 8, Moses assured them one more time, just as he had done in verse 6, that God would never leave them nor forsake them, that he would always be there. So we see at this point, the choice again was theirs. Stay or go, obey or disobey. I said earlier, one of the biggest problems and the biggest reasons that we don't like change is fear. And God knew that the Israelites were afraid at this point. Remember, it was fear that had kept their ancestors out of Canaan. But God is telling them then, and he is telling us now, I am with you, don't be afraid. God wants us to know that if we are truly following as he leads us, and we step out in faith and trust, he is there. You say, well, I just don't know. That's the whole point. Sometimes we don't know. But we step out in faith and we are not afraid. We are not discouraged because we know that he will never leave us. He will never forsake us. When it comes to us going out and spreading the gospel, as we are commanded to do, when it comes to that, it's easy to sit back and say, oh, I don't really know what I can do to help spread the gospel. And then sit back and do nothing. I don't know what I can do, so I will just do nothing. I don't think I can, so I just won't do anything. Who does that sound like? That sounds like the first group of people who got to the promised land and said, I don't think I can do it, so I won't do anything. Let me assure you that if God saved you, he saved you for a purpose. If he has saved you, it was to go out and be a light to those who are in darkness. Those who were like you were before you were saved. Some folks say, well, I can't teach or I can't preach. That's fine. Because teaching and preaching are only a small part of the work of God. We can all pray. We can all tell others what God has done for us. We can all become involved in some type of evangelism. Remember, that's what we are called to do. Share the gospel. Yes, we are to help encourage and lift one another up in this group. And that's important. But our main commission that Jesus himself gave us was to go. Yes, there's things we have to do around here. But the one thing that we are commanded to do is to go out into the world and spread the gospel. Something else we can do is we can support our pastor. Support him in prayer and in encouragement. Even if we feel like we are not personally capable of sharing the gospel, we can go out into the community and invite folks to church so that they can hear the gospel and have the opportunity to choose Christ for themselves. You say, well, I just don't think I can get my Bible out and do it. Then get out and do something to get people here so somebody else can tell them. We can do that. We can live a life that others will say, there's something about you that's different. What is it? There is so much that needs to be done, and I will tell you that your pastor cannot do it all. And there will always be those who say, well, I just don't see what needs to be done. I will tell you, come see Pastor Magine sometime, or see me. And I bet one of us can help you with that. Or better yet, pray and ask God to show you. And I assure you that he will. If you, in sincere prayer, get down before God and say, I know there's something that I should be doing. Please show me what it is. And until he does, you can get with Pastor Magine or me. I'm not saying that we make changes just for the sake of change. That is never a good idea. But I will tell you this, that if God speaks to us to step out in faith and to do some things that we've never done before, then we have no choice but to do it and trust him that he will be there. Stop being afraid. That's what stopped the Israelites from going and taking the land that God had promised them, was fear. Fear of something that they didn't even know. Just fear. And that's what stops us from doing the things that God calls us to do so many times. When we realize that there are people who are dying without knowing who Jesus is, and we really realize that, then we will know that it's time to step up like Joshua and Caleb and say, we will go. We can do this. The words that Moses spoke in Deuteronomy were quoted by the Apostle Paul centuries later. Paul wrote in Hebrews 13, 5 through 6, he said, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say this with confidence, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Well, I just don't want to go knock on somebody's door because they might open the door and be mean to me. The Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? Fear will paralyze us. It will paralyze us in the natural as well as in the spiritual. When God calls us to a ministry, be it ushering, cleaning, painting, teaching, singing, praying, preaching, knocking on doors, handing out flyers in a parking lot, whatever it is that he calls us to do, it might be a huge transition from where we are right now. And going to where he wants us to be might seem like it's just something we cannot do. And if we're not careful, because of fear, we will just do nothing. In our lives, when we experience these times of change and transition as we step into the place where God has called us, we need to trust him and know that that he is with us just as he was with the Israelites as they were entering into the promised land. Whatever the situation, God wants us to know that if we seek him, he will show us the way to go. And let me add that while there are things that we do in and around the church that are vital to the local church body in order to operate, the main calling for all of us is to share the gospel with a lost world. If we are not involved in doing that in some form, then I don't believe we're being obedient to the Great Commission that Jesus gave to each of us as followers. Yeah, but I'm doing this, and I'm doing this, and I'm doing this. But are we doing what Jesus told us to do, and that was to go out into the world and share the gospel? So I'm not saying that. I'm not saying stop doing what you're doing, but maybe God is calling us to add something to that. To reach out to those who are around us, who are lost and dying and going to hell, who have not heard about Jesus Christ. All through the Bible, there are examples of people in crisis, or people who are facing choices or transitions in their lives. And in those examples, we see that there were some on both sides of the situation. Some chose to follow God, others chose to not do anything at all. I will tell you that going when God says go may not always be the easiest thing, but it will always be the right thing. When the Israelites were facing an unknown country full of unknown people, God didn't say it was going to be easy. Y'all just put it on cruise control. Just go across the line and just sit back and I'll do it all. That's not what he said. He said that he would go before them, which meant that they still had to go. They still had to fight some battles. But he promised that he would fight the battles with them or for them. And God promised that he would always be with them as long as they were obedient to where he called them to go. When you get to that place where you are ready to say, God, here I am, tell me what you want me to do, I won't tell you that God will speak to you in an audible voice. He might not. But he will speak to you in a way that you will know without a doubt that it was him. It may be through a series of events that take place in your life. It may be a sermon, maybe today. It may be revealed to you as you seek God in prayer. Maybe a word of wisdom from another believer. There are just a lot of ways that God can speak to us. He even spoke to a man named Balaam through a donkey in the Old Testament. And that gives me a certain amount of hope for today's sermon. The best part of this whole concept is this, though. No matter how hard or how difficult or uncomfortable things get, if you are following God's direction, he is always there. That goes for our natural lives as well as our spiritual lives. The Israelites faced a lot of enemies in Canaan, and they defeated them. And the key was that if God told them to fight, they fought. But if God told them just to walk around the walls of Jericho and just walk, then they just walked. They followed what God told them to do, and they defeated their enemies. No matter how he told them to fight the battle, if they were obedient, they were victorious. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that you will never have to fight a battle. In fact, I'm going to do just the opposite and assure you that you will fight some battles. But I will also assure you that if you are following God as he leads you, he will fight right alongside of you, or sometimes he'll just go before you and take care of all of it. But you won't fight it alone. The same promise that God made to the Hebrews, the Israelites facing Canaan, will still stand for you and me today. Be strong, be courageous, do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Don't look around at the circumstances and say, yeah, but. I thought about titling today's message, Defeating the Yeah Buts. Because so many times that's what stops us from doing stuff. We say, yeah, but if God said go, then we just go. There are no yeah buts. God cannot fail. He always keeps his promises. But sometimes his promises are conditional. It's kind of like when you go to work. It's conditional. If you work all week, you get a paycheck. If you don't work all week, you probably don't get a paycheck. And that's kind of the way the promises of God are. God told the Israelites, and I believe it's still the same for us today. If you keep my commands, if you follow the direction that I lead you, I will be there and I will never forsake you. God says, if you volunteer to teach that children's Bible class, I will give you the words to say. Now, you might have to study. In fact, I know you will have to study. You'll have to put some effort into it. You'll have to do some things. But I will help you get it done. If I call you to do that, we can get it done together. Yeah, but I've never done that before. The children of Israel had never been into Canaan before. God says if you will volunteer to help your pastor with whatever he needs help with, I will be there and help you to get it done. Don't let fear of change or fear of something that you've never done before paralyze you into doing nothing. Because standing on the border of Canaan will get you nowhere. You will die in the wilderness. Before the Apostle Peter was a follower of Jesus, he was a fisherman. And I will tell you, he was not the most intelligent person that Jesus called to follow him. In fact, it seemed through his actions that he had a problem with talking and acting before he thought. But in spite of his shortcomings and his personal flaws, he stood in front of a crowd of people on the day of Pentecost and preached his first sermon. And as a result, there was over 3,000 people who were saved. If God was able to change Peter from a rough fisherman into a powerful preacher, what can he do in your life? He couldn't even drive a car. Deuteronomy 34, verses 1 through 4. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to the top of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, in the Negev and the whole region, from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. Then the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said, I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." The first part of this next verse, verse 5, says, "And Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in Moab, as the Lord had said." Before Moses died, God allowed him to climb up Mount Nebo in Moab and view the promised land. And then Moses died and he was buried. The scripture says that he was 120 years old when he died. And through that 120-year lifetime of Moses, he had seen a lot of transitions in his life. And I don't mean just little ones. He had gone from a condemned baby to a privileged member of Pharaoh's household. He went from living in the house of a king to leading sheep. And from leading sheep to leading hundreds of thousands of people. And the greatest part of all of that was that God was in control through every step of his life. Even though Moses wouldn't be the one leading the Israelites into Canaan, God still had a plan. God chose Joshua to lead the people into the land of Canaan. And I'm sure Joshua didn't do everything like Moses did, but he was following God, and that was reason enough for the people to follow him. The people followed Joshua because he was the one who was chosen to be their leader. The fact that he was filled with the spirit of wisdom didn't hurt anything either. I will tell you that the process of change and transition in our lives is inevitable. I will be honest with you. If someone would have told me several years ago that I would have traveled to Africa, to the Democratic Republic of the Congo to preach, I would have said several things. Among them would have been, "You're out of your mind." I would have said, first of all, "I don't preach." And second of all, "I ain't going to Africa." Pardon my English. And yet, there I was, by myself, in a building with no walls, with dirt on the floor, no floor, just dirt, and just a roof, preaching to a group of people who I didn't know, had never seen before. And when I look back at that, I realize one thing. Things change. Circumstances may change as we get older. The things that we're able to do as we get older will change too. I will assure you, I can't do the things I used to do. And I'm still really, really young. But as I get older, there'll be some things that I won't be able to do, and somebody else is going to have to step up and do them. But no matter where you are, in what season of your life or what place of your life that you were in, there is a place for you in the work of the Lord. No matter how old or how young you might be. No matter how much you know about the Bible, or no matter how much you think you don't know about the Bible, there is still a place for you. When God came to Moses at Midian, while he was in that part of his life of tending sheep, kind of hiding out in the desert, Moses' excuse wasn't that he was 80 years old, and so I can't go before the king. His excuse was that he stuttered. I can't go to the Pharaoh. I stutter. That was his reason why he couldn't do it. Even though God had done all these marvelous things in his life and these miraculous things, he used the excuse that I can't do it because I stutter. And God said, okay, that's fine. You're still going to go, but I'll let you take your brother Aaron with you and he can do the talking. But Moses still had to go. You still have to go because I have plans for you. And boy, what plans did he have? Wow. Many times in our lives, it is a crisis that brings about a transition or change in the direction of our lives. We Christians love us some miracles, don't we? But if you really think about it, without a crisis, it's pretty difficult to have a miracle. We just saw some of the events of Moses' life and how they were brought about by crisis. What about the part where the Israelites escape from Egypt and they find themselves with the Red Sea in front of them and an army from Pharaoh behind them? I'm sure they thought at some point, what do we do now? We don't have an army. We're just people on the run. If there had been a bridge over the Red Sea, they would have just crossed it and gone on. But you know what? If there had been a bridge in the Red Sea, Pharaoh's army would have just crossed it and come after them. Instead, the way that God fixed it is he told Moses, stretch out your staff, and he did, and the waters parted, and the children of Israel walked across on dry land, and when they got to the other side, Pharaoh's army comes in, and when they get out in the middle, the water goes back together, and they all drown. You see, it took a crisis for there to be a miracle. Yeah, but that was back then. Yeah, it was back then. But the Bible also says that God is the same yesterday, today, and he'll be the same tomorrow, which tells me that God that did that for them is still the same God that we serve today. And time again, we see that in the darkest hours of people's lives, that's when they realized how limited they were in their own strength. Fortunately for a lot of them, they also realized at that same time that God was not limited a bit in his strength. God, speaking to David in Psalm 46 and 10, said, "Be still and know that I am God." There had to be some anxiety in David's life for God to speak those words to him, to be still and know that I am God. And yes, we will face some things that we do not understand. And if and when that happens, we still must be still and know that he is God. Yes, things may not always go as we had planned. Our circumstances may change, but our God does not. God has a plan for your life. He has a path for you to follow. He has called each and every believer to a ministry. He has given each of us the same opportunity as the Israelites had the very first time they stood on the border of Canaan. Do we step out in faith? Do we step out in faith to what God has called us to do? Or do we say the task is bigger than I am? Which would possibly be true. But let me assure you that if that's where God has called you, the task is not bigger than my God. The choice is ours. Do we stay? Or do we step out to what God is calling us to do? John Piper said, God is not looking for people to work for him, but people who will let him work mightily in and through them. God is not looking for people to work for him, but instead he's looking for people who will let him work through them. Changes and choices. Fear of the unknown. I will close with the words that Moses said to Joshua in Deuteronomy 31 and 8. Real simple words. The Lord himself goes before you, and he will be with you. He will never leave you, nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. So what do we do now? I will tell you, for me, this has been a week of a lot of reflection. What do we do now? So I don't know what I can do. You can do whatever God calls you to do. I don't know what that is, but I know it's something. In order for us to see the things happen that we need to see happen and that we want to see happen at High Point Church, it's going to call for us to step out and maybe do some things we've never done before. It might call for us to do some things a little differently than we've done them in the past. But if Pastor Magine stands here and says, this is where I feel like God is leading us, then you know what? We just step in and follow him. That's not the time for us to rebel and say, well, I don't think we can do that. We know where that got the children of Israel. Well, what can I do? I don't know. But I will ask you to stand this morning. And I will tell you that this morning in our Sunday school lesson, we talked about Isaiah. And I had this all planned out before I even had my quarterly with what the Sunday school lesson was going to be this morning. And we see that Isaiah comes into the presence of God, and he stands before this vision. In this vision, he stands before this great and mighty God, and he sees how great God is. And because of God's holiness, it points out to him some flaws that maybe he has in his life. And then once those flaws are atoned for, the Lord speaks and says to these angels that are flying around about him, he says, "Who will we send?" And Isaiah raises his hand and says, "Here I am, send me." And he did it before he even knew what the task was. But the first thing he had to do was to search his heart and make sure that there was nothing there that shouldn't be there. And then once that was there, then there was this open door of communication with his God. And once there was this open door of communication, it was easy for him to hear what God was calling. I need somebody to go. Who will go? Here I am. Send me. I look around this morning and I would say that most everybody here considers himself saved, considers himself a follower of Christ, a Christian. But could we purposely ask God this morning to look at our lives? And if there's anything in our lives that shouldn't be there, Lord, could you take that away and open up this door of communication with you so that I can hear what you want me to do? And then when we hear what God says to us, then the important thing, another important thing, is that we say, "Here I am, send me." There's an old song that says, "I surrender all